Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to tonight's evening lecture. As a quick announcement, please fill out this this evaluation sheet that we have for tonight's evening lecture. It helps us to essentially pick more topics, to see if we want to continue topics. It helps us make decisions about what topics to have for future evening lectures. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Larry Waldman. Dr. Waldman is a recently retired licensed clinical forensic psychologist and certified school psychologist in Phoenix, Arizona. He conducted a private practice for the past 38 years, providing legal consultations and working with children, teens, parents, couples, and adults in a solution-focused manner. His BS in education psychology was from the University of Wisconsin. His master's in school psychology was from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And his PhD in educational psychology was earned here locally at Arizona State University. Dr. Waldman has written numerous articles which have been published in the local Phoenix media and in the national press, as well as 5 books thus far that he has currently on display in the front table if you have not seen them. Now, everyone, please, Dr. Waldman.
Well, thank you, Josh. That was probably the second nicest introduction I've ever received. Actually, the nicest introduction I received occurred a couple of weeks ago. I was speaking in Texas, and the Masters of Ceremony failed to show up, and I had to introduce myself. As Josh indicated, I've recently retired from active private practice. I used to see 32 clients a week for, again, almost 40 years. And I retired more or less on my 69th birthday in early December. That was kind of my birthday to myself, if you will. Although I continue to work, certainly I consult to Social Security. I teach for Northern Arizona University in the graduate department. I continue to speak. In fact, last weekend I was speaking in Vancouver, Canada, to the British Columbia Psychological Association on how to develop, manage, and market a private mental health practice. I also, of course, speak locally as we're doing here this evening, which I'm quite excited about. As Josh mentioned, I have done a fair amount of writing. My first book came out in the early 80s. This is now its third edition, entitled Who's Raising Whom? Actually, my publisher indicated to me a couple of weeks ago that as far as he can tell, we've sold over 20,000 copies of this book across the nation. We are going to be talking about, I'll be talking about some of the issues in this book this evening. The second book that I wrote came in the early 90s, which was a follow-up to Who's Raising Whom? This one's entitled Coping with Your Adolescent. Notice we're not talking about changing your adolescent, we're talking about coping with your adolescent. That's an important difference. Many parents used to come to me and say, well, my kid is going to be 18 in about 3 months, and we don't like where he's going, and we'd like you to shape him out before it's too late. Well, I'm afraid that boat has already left the dock. As I like to say, if you haven't read this one, then you certainly are going to need this one. In the early 2000s, I wrote, How Come I Love Him But Can't Live With Him? How to Make Your Marriage or Relationship Better. I should say that I stole all my titles from my clients. Because in every case, one client at one time or another, maybe in exasperation, said, who's raising whom? Well, actually they said, who's raising who here? Of course, correctly, it's whom. Who's raising whom here? Or maybe I need to learn to cope with my adolescent. And I had a number of frustrated housewives, in fact, say, you know, I love him, but I just don't, excuse me, I love him, but I just can't live with him. Okay? Now, getting a little more current, a couple of years ago, I wrote this book. This book is for mental health professionals who are thinking about going into private practice or are in private practice and would like their practice to run a little more effectively or perhaps a little more lucratively, if you will. And this book is entitled The Graduate Course You Never Had. Because truth of the matter is, you don't get a graduate course on how to run or conduct the business of psychotherapy. You get courses on how to conduct psychotherapy, but not any courses on how to run a business conducting psychotherapy. And my most recent book came out, in fact, 2 years ago, entitled Too Busy Earning a Living to Make Your Fortune? The subtitle is Discover the Psychology of Achieving Your Life Goals. And this book is about just that, achieving your life goals. It's not about money. Money's that's not everyone's goal. That's not important. It's achieving our goals, with the goals we often set for ourselves that unfortunately many of us fail to achieve. I can't tell you how many times I've sat in front of a client who told me, kind of bemoaning the fact that, I always wanted to be a teacher, or I wanted, to go to law school, or I wanted to go to Paris, or I wanted to learn to play the piano, or this or that, whatever, and yet that never happened. So this book talks about that. These books will be available if you're interested in the front when we conclude. Okay. You should have a copy of an outline. I think most people received one as they're coming in, because I will be following that as we go. Now, I understand that many of you are psychology students, so this first part shouldn't be too new. Before we go any further, I should mention that, making a living conducting a private practice is really kind of a crazy way to do that. And here's a good example. Shortly before I retired, I had this middle-aged couple come in for couples counseling or marital counseling. They were in their mid to late 60s. Now you see, the older I get, the older middle-aged becomes. Well, as soon as we sat down, Susan launched into this tirade about how old George here has used and abused her all these 40 years or thereabouts. Now, normally when you do couples work, when one party makes an allegation, typically the other party will try to interrupt and defend themselves. But in this case, every time Susan made a charge, old George just kind of shook his head and went, acknowledging every allegation that Susan made. Well, finally at the end of the hour, thank God, I turned to Susan and I said, Susan, you're a good person. You deserve respect and consideration. And then I turned to George and I said, George, did you see that? He went, yeah. I said, George, Susan needs that kind of appreciation at least twice a week. And George said, Doc, I think you're right. I can bring her by on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, as all of you out here who are studying psychology already know, there are basically 4 different general approaches or schools in this science of psychology. And I'm not going to, of course, make a long lecture out of this, although I have, because I teach this stuff. But it's just kind of a setup for what I want to share with you this evening. The first school, if you will, is often referred to as the biological school. Now, this is pretty much the realm of the psychiatrist. The biological school argues that who and what we become is basically understood through our biology and physiology and genes, if you will. And from the biological perspective, a healthy individual is someone who's got essentially good physiology. And from that same point of view, from a biological view, someone who's not doing well mentally is having basically a chemical imbalance. And thus, the treatment for that, from the biological perspective, would be to try to correct that chemical imbalance and hence use some medication. All right, that's the biological view in a nutshell, a very small nutshell. That, by the way, has been around the longest. So I'm kind of taking a chronological view here. The next school is the analytic school, or psychoanalytic school, or sometimes simply called the Freudian school. This school came about in the late 1800s. Of course, it was purported by Sigmund Freud. Now, in a nutshell, what Freud argued is that what we learn as children becomes an unconscious truth, if you will. And that is, the young child looks at his or her life, particularly starting around age 6 and 7, when they can really begin to put things together. And for the next, almost decade or so, the child comes to learn certain things about their role in their life. And they learn these things based on their interactions with the world and their parents and significant others and so forth. And they come to learn things. It becomes their, as I like to call it, their truths. Good, bad, or indifferent, it's based on, again, the perception of their world. So, for example, let's just say hypothetically, for example, if a child, let's say a little girl, grows up in an environment where, let's say hypothetically, father is an alcoholic and very distant and unavailable, based on that life, if you will, during that first decade or so, decade and a half, that child now begins to learn some things about men. Like what, for example? Sorry?
She just may assume that
Well, yes, she might assume that most men are drunks, possibly. But on a more psychological level, I think it's probably fair to argue she's going to come to assume that men are not that emotionally available. And that you have to work really hard to get male attention. Now, given her specific perspective in her childhood, is that view incorrect? No, not at all. But you can see, if this little girl takes that view and integrates that, and then of course goes on into her adolescence and young adulthood and so forth, with this kind of belief that men are not very emotionally unavailable, we can start making some predictions, can't we? Who is she going to be attracted to? Emotionally unavailable men, right? Because that's what she's accustomed to. So, from the analytic perspective, a healthy individual is someone who happens to grow up in a healthy environment and learns positive beliefs. Now, if that person is having problems emotionally, the treatment, according to this perspective, is psychoanalysis, where you help the adult now, who, by the way, in most cases, doesn't understand this. I can't tell you how many times I sat across from a female client who said to me, I don't understand this. Why do I keep choosing the wrong kind of guy? Duh. Well, because that's what you learned. So, from the psychoanalytic perspective, what is treatment then is catharsis, to use a Freudian term, to help the person understand their unconscious truth. We then move up, about 50 years or so, and we then now have the cognitive school. Can you guys see that over there? Is that a little better? Is that a little better? Excuse me. Now, the cognitive school started in Europe and was brought to the States in just about the turn of the century, 1900s. And when it came to the States, we changed the term from Gestalt psychology to cognitive psychology. And basically what cognitive psychology is the focus not on our biology, not on our childhood, but rather the focus is on what it is we're saying to ourselves, what it is we're thinking. And the premise of cognitive psychology is an healthy individual is someone who says healthy things to themselves. An unhealthy individual is someone who says negative things to themselves. For example, if you're about to go into a job interview, you're likely to say something to yourself. Now, some people might say, I'm going to kill this. I'm the right person for the job. As I used to coach my kids as they grew up in situations like that, I used to tell them to think you would be crazy not to hire me. It'd be a big mistake. Now, you don't say that, but you think that. On the other hand, some people say something different. Like, I never do well in these interviews. This is my 4th or 5th one, and I haven't gotten a job offer yet. I suck at this. I'm probably going to bomb this one too. Now, if you go into that interview with that kind of self-talk, what do you think's going to happen? It's going to be a self-fulfilling failure, exactly. So, from the cognitive perspective, again, being mentally healthy means speaking to yourself in a healthy manner, thinking to yourself in a healthy manner. Being cognitively unhealthy is this negative self-talk. I refer to it as stinkin' thinking. And of course, therapy then, according to a cognitive perspective, is getting the person to understand their negative self-talk and helping them to change the script, as we call it. All right, now we come to the present, and we have the behavioral school. probably purported best by B.F. Skinner in the 40s. Excuse me. Now, the behavioral school is a very pragmatic school. Basically, what the behavioral school says is that what's important is not our biology and physiology and not the things we learned to be true in our childhood and not what it is we're thinking. Rather, what's most important is what we are doing, how we are acting, how we are behaving. And according to the behavioral school, every behavior has one of three consequences. Some behaviors have a positive consequence. And when a behavior has a positive consequence, the tendency then is for that behavior to be repeated. Sometimes a behavior has a neutral consequence, and research clearly shows that behavior followed by a neutral or a nothing kind of response actually tends to be reduced. And behavior followed by a negative consequence has variable results, and we'll talk more about that. And so, according to the behavioral view, who and what we become is essentially a function of our sum of our behaviors and the consequences to those behaviors. Now, from a parenting perspective, particularly dealing with, of course, children and young children, I submit that the behavioral perspective makes the most sense. It's the easiest to understand, and I think the easiest to implement. And hence, when I work with parents, I take a strict behavioral perspective. Because think about it. We're dealing with children, and early on, at least for the first, 2 years or so, most children are pre-verbal. They're not using language. And so how does the child see the world? The child sees the world strictly in terms of actions. The child exhibits some kind of behavior, and there's a reaction. From day one, the child cries, and what happens? Mom comes running. The child gets picked up and fed. And it doesn't take the child very long to go, We're talking a neonate, 10 days old, and it's going, this is interesting. I make this sound, and I get picked up, and I get something put in my mouth that feeds me something good. And so these kids very, very, very early on say, okay, I get that. I cry and this happens, and so therefore they cry a lot. Truthfully, I submit, most babies understand this behavioral theory better than most adults, better than their parents. Let me give you an example. A while ago, I was at a friend's house. Well, actually, I was at the daughter of a very good friend's house for a barbecue. And Terry's a very bright young woman. She has a big job. She has an MBA from USC. And she was feeding Wayne. Wayne at the time was 11 months old. And he was kind of a husky little guy, very smart. And I believe she was feeding him mashed bananas. She had taken a whole banana and mashed it up and was shoveling it in. And he was chowing down. And I was kind of watching the ball game, but out of the corner of my eye, I was watching this too. Well, about halfway through the bananas, she gives him a spoonful and he shuts his mouth. So she gives him another try and keeps his mouth shut. All right? So now what does she do? Come on, all you parents out there. What do? I heard it. It's a little louder. Airplane. Absolutely. It's written in the mommy manual. When a child stops eating, you immediately resort to airplanes with sound effects, which is exactly what Terry did. So she went, and the little turkey opened right up. And I'm getting a big kick out of that. And there it goes. And she probably got, I don't know, another 6 spoonfuls or so. But somewhere around the 7th or 8th spoonful, she makes an airplane and shuts his mouth again. Tries it again. Mouth is shut. All right? What does she do? Come on. What are you parents out there? What do we do? Bigger airplanes. Now she's going, wah! I thought she was going to throw her shoulder out, so help me God. Ah! More sound effect. Ah! And that turkey opens up, and there it goes again. Now, at this point, I guess I must have smiled. And she turned to me, she caught my smile, and she said, she calls me Uncle Larry. She says, Uncle Larry, I see you've noticed something. And I said, well, yeah, actually I did. And she said, so what did you notice? And I said, well, I noticed that what you're teaching him is that if he needs to eat, you got to give him dinner and a show. And I said, that's perfectly fine, if that's what you want. And she said, well, no, I really don't want to do that. I would rather that he just eat and get it done with. And then I said, okay. So she says, so what should you do? What should I do? And I said, well, give it to him regularly, once or twice, and if he doesn't take it, pack up and be done. Okay. So, gave it to him once, closed his mouth, didn't take it. Gave him to him a second time, closed his mouth, didn't take it. And she started to pack up, and what do you think he began to do? Cry. Exactly. He was still hungry, but like I said, he wanted his dinner, but if he could make his mother act like a fool, he would do that too. So here it is. This 11-month-old who wasn't saying any words yet, couldn't walk yet, was manipulating the skivvies off this woman who probably makes 6 figures. Now who's smarter? Yeah. In my 40-some years of practice, if I include the 7 years as a school psychologist in Scottsdale schools before I went into private practice, I probably have heard at least, and this is no exaggeration, 100 times from one parent who says, I have to tell my kid at least 5 times before he'll do anything. How many of you have said that once or twice yourself? Okay? I I always have the same response. And here it is. What do you think you've taught him or her by your first request? Yeah, that's just a suggestion. Because what have you taught him or her by your first request in this process? Does the child have to respond? It's optional, exactly. Does the child have to respond? Did you teach the child that he or she has to respond to your first request? Tell me. No. What has the child learned? Remember, this is a learning theory. What has the child learned? When you say, Billy, would you please go and clean your room? To Billy, what does that mean? Mom has some idea about a room being clean. Maybe when I get around to it. In other words, we're just getting started. Then that mother, of course, talks to her neighbor next door and says, Billy is such a stubborn kid. I have to tell him about half a dozen times every time to do something. Really? Was he born that way? I don't think so. I think we taught him that the way it's going to work is, I'm going to first ask you very politely. The second time, I'm going to ask a little firmer. The third time, a little louder. The fourth time, really loud. And the fifth time, get in here and clean your room. And at that point, the kid knows, okay, it's time to go clean my room. That's what happens, you see. The bottom line is that parents have to understand, like their kids do, that there is a relationship between their behavior and your consequence. That's it in a nutshell. If you can grasp that as a parent and be fully mindful of that you are exquisitely cognizant of what you're doing after your child behaves, you've got it. But unfortunately, for most folks, that's tough. What's the most valuable thing we can provide our child? Security, okay, that's a good one. Security's good. Everybody needs security. What else? Love, okay. Sure, gotta have love. I've heard discipline. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All these things are good. But now let's get real. How does your 3-year-old know you're providing him security? You tuck him in at night. Okay, that's good, right? But if you said to him, Jimmy, I'm tucking you in. Don't you feel really secure now? I feel tucked in. How does a child know they're loved? We tell them, right? How do we show them? We hold them, hug them, okay? I think you're beginning to get an idea of where I'm going. The point is, the only way the child knows they're getting any of these things is in terms of what the parent does. How the parent acts. And I heard the word already. In other words, it really comes down to the parent providing the all magic, most important thing we can give them is our undivided time and attention. And when we do that, when we give our kids quality time, undivided time and attention, that's what our kids crave. That's what they love. Now here's the $64 question. When do most parents give most of their attention to their children? Okay. Well, this has been researched rather thoroughly. And what the data shows pretty clearly is that 90% of the time, when the child is behaving in a way that we would consider to be inappropriate, what do they get? Attention! And 90% of the time, when the child is behaving appropriately and well, what do they get? Bupkis. Nothing. Now, do you remember what we talked about up here before? I said I had a plus and an N and a minus. What did I say happens after the N? Behavior followed by neutral or nothing responses do what? Decrease, drop out. So what goes on in most homes, you see, actually works in contrast to behavioral therapy. Now remember, kids haven't read the book yet. They don't know what's right or wrong. They don't know that. All they know is, I want attention. Like they learned that first week of their life when they cried and got held and fed. I want attention. And what they quickly learn by the time they're, 2, 3, is that the best way to get attention is to do what mommy says? To play quietly in the corner? Is that what gets them attention? No! What gets them attention is causing what we'd call trouble. Of course, from the child's perspective, it's just business as usual. This is what I'm supposed to do. I hope you can understand that. But this is what's going on. Because inappropriate behavior is getting all the attention. And then the parent wonders, why doesn't he behave? I refer to this parenting philosophy, this inverted parenting philosophy, as a sleeping dog parenting plan. You know that old adage, when a dog is sleeping, what do? Let it lie. Let a sleeping dog lie. Well, that's kind of what parents do with their kids. If the kid is good, shh, don't bother them. Don't mess it up. Let's pray it lasts long as possible. And all this time, the child is learning, look at this. I'm playing nicely by myself. I'm playing nicely with my sister, and mom is in the other room. I don't see her. She's doing her mail or reading the paper or whatever. Now, if I go and smack my sister and Judy goes, guess what? Where's mom? Right here. And of course, as far as the kid goes, okay, I get it. I can do that. That's how I got my attention. So again, we as parents have to be at least as smart as our kids and understand this basic paradigm that's operating. And as simple as that is, I made a good living teaching this to parents. When my kids were 3, I have 2 sons. My older son Josh is 40, is a litigation attorney in Southern California, married to a wonderful woman, and they they have my grandson, I like to call him, who's 1. In fact, we're going there next weekend for his 1-year-old birthday. I'm all excited. And my younger son, Chad, who's 35, is a school psychologist, starting out like his old man, in Portland, Oregon. And he too married a wonderful woman and no grandkids yet. But there's time. So when each of them were 3, obviously it was about 4 years apart, I determined it was time to teach them how to behave in a grocery store. And this is what I did. So let's take Josh since he was the first. So when Josh was 3, we walked into the grocery store, right into the vestibule, and I got down on my knees. So I was eyeball to eyeball. And I said, Josh, it's important that you learn how to behave in a grocery store. Now, behaving appropriately in a grocery store looks like the following, and repeat after me. You will walk by my side. I'll walk by your side. You will hold my hand. I'll hold your hand. You will speak in a quiet voice. I'll speak in a quiet voice. You will not touch anything. I will not touch anything. Nor will you ask for anything. I will not ask anything. Good. Let's repeat them again. And we did it again. And then I said, all right, Josh, now, if you can exhibit those behaviors, by the time we get to the back of the store, we will go to the bakery and you can select a cookie, which I will hold. If you continue to exhibit those appropriate behaviors, at the time we check out, you and I will share it. Now, how many sessions do you think it took for each of my sons to learn how to behave in a grocery store? 1. Now, why? Okay. Here's why. There's a couple of, and the reason I go through this is because this, in fact, illustrates the basic principles of behavior therapy or behavior modification. 1. Each of my sons knew exactly, explicitly, specifically what their behavior was to look like. Do you know what most parents do when they walk into a grocery store with a kid? They say first a little prayer. And then they look down at the kid and say, okay, we're in a grocery store. What are the two words? Be good. We've communicated there, haven't we? This 3-year-old knows exactly what his behavior is supposed to look like. Right? No. So you see, the first rule in behavior modification is we need a target behavior. Whoever we're dealing with, in this case I'm dealing with my sons, my kids needed to know exactly what I wanted. It's not be good, be nice, behave. What the heck is that to a 3-year-old? Most importantly, what does that look like? So you see, I gave them 5 clear definitions that even a 3-year-old could understand what it looks like. And I swear, that's the bulk of it. If a parent was able to clearly specify to their child what it is they want, the game is already 2/3 over. But most time they don't. Most time they don't. We don't know what we're supposed to do. And by the way, this doesn't just apply to parents and kids. How about couples? I can't tell you how many times I'm sat in front, and I saw 1,000 or more couples in my time. I wrote, it's one of the books I wrote, where the wife says to the husband, "You're about as affectionate as a cold fish." And his response typically was, "You don't know what you're talking about. I'm as affectionate as the next guy." Helping couples identify what it is they really wanted or didn't want. Works both ways. Just think how much better your relationship could be if you could truly articulate your needs. Now, I'm not going to sit here and promise you that every time you clearly articulate your need, you're going to get it. But I think you can certainly see that you're more likely to get hubby to be more affectionate if, for example, if you said, "Dear, I would really like it if you gave me a 30-second back rub tonight," as opposed to, "When are you going to be more affectionate?" See the difference? So the same thing is true here, of course, with kids. If you can identify for them what their behavior is supposed to look like, the battle is almost won. 2, the kids knew what they were going to get. Specifically, they knew exactly what the reward's going to be. It wasn't like, "Oh, we're going to go have fun, or we'll go to the park, maybe." They knew exactly what they were supposed to do and exactly what it was going to get them. I'm surprised someone hasn't asked me the question yet. I always usually get it about now. Pardon me? We only bought one. Remember, we were going to share it if he met the contract, if he continued to behave. Yes.
So, for the reward, do you do it continuously, or once you achieve the behavior that you want, then you take away the reward?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do I do it continually? Well, I did that probably for the first couple of times that we went to the grocery store. And after that, I then faded it out. But the question I usually get is, well, what would have happened if Josh or Chad didn't fulfill the contract? Well, you see, by the time my kids were 3, they knew that if I say something like this and I have to speak to them twice about staying on track, they've negated the contract. And what I would have done is broken the cookie in half, eaten my half, and thrown his half away. And my kids knew that. Now, some people say, oh, that's mean. No, that's life. See, I started raising my kids from the time they were 3, even before that, to live life. I believe the goal and objective of every parent is to raise an independent, responsible young person. Now, where in life as an adult, when you screw up, do you still get a half a cookie? It doesn't, yeah, unless yourself, right, yeah. Unless you feed yourself, exactly. But that's my point. Life doesn't work that way, and I wanted my kids to see that. So you see, these two important objectives here of being very specific about the behavior and very specific about what they get, you're there. Now, the reward here, there's a couple of important rules about the reward. We call it reinforcement. One rule, of course, we already know, is just like the target behavior needs to be specific, the reinforcement needs to be specific. Excuse me. Many times I'm in the park or whatever and I hear, "Way to go, Johnny! Good boy!" Now, is that reinforcement? Raise your hand. Is that reinforcement? Right? That's not. That's a compliment. That's a compliment. Okay? Why do we reinforce our kids? Why do we reinforce their behavior? There's two reasons. One's already up there. One is to what? Reward the good behavior. That's one. But there's another reason why we reinforce our kids. A little louder? Oh, there's a very smart person there. We want the behavior to be duplicated. Absolutely correct. So you see, there's two pieces to reinforcement. One is to reward the current behavior, but two, to educate the child so that they know what they can do again in the future. That's appropriate. So, when I say, "Good job, Johnny," what is he going to duplicate? Yeah, that's why it's a compliment and not reinforcement. So you see, after I made my contract with my kids and I started walking down the produce aisle, which was first, on a regular basis, I would turn to Josh and say, "Josh, I really love the way you're walking so quietly and holding my hand. Oh, that cookie's really going to taste good. What kind do you think we're going to get? Oh, Josh, I really love the way you're keeping your hands to yourself." What was I doing? I was reinforcing a specific behavior so that Josh came to understand, and later Chad, of course, that these are the behaviors one needs to exhibit in the grocery store. I get a lot of parents, you say, oh, I know all about reinforcement, everybody knows. No, you don't. Our goal as parents, in addition, of course, to raising an independent, responsible young adult, is to get across the message is that it pays off to be good. That's what we're trying to do. To get them to understand that being good, being appropriate, pays off. You get a lot more out of life by being appropriate and responsible than otherwise. It's always interesting whenever I used to meet a parent or couple of parents for the first time, and they would be talking about their incorrigible kid or whatever, and of course one of the first things they would start talking about, and what they wanted to focus on, if I allowed it, was they wanted to stop all this bad behavior. So most parents are focused on bad behavior. So we got to stop. And of course I never did that first. Because if we're focusing on bad behavior first, we're doing things to bad behavior, what are we actually doing? Remember this word? We're providing more attention to this bad behavior, and now we're just chasing our tail. So here's a little secret. The best way to reduce bad behavior in our kids is to increase the amount of good behavior they exhibit. Because if you can catch them being good, and see, it's kind of a mind shift for parents. Most parents walk around in their home with a kind of a detector, and they're looking for bad behavior. Up, 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 up. What's that noise? Up, 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 up. They're looking for bad behavior. And that's what they address. And that's what they give attention to. And guess what? Their kids give them plenty of that to look for. Because as far as the kids are concerned, that's the way it works. How would they know better? What do you expect a 3-year-old to say? Mom, I just read this textbook on behavioral psychology, and you've got it ass backwards. I don't think so. You're setting the stage. They're just playing in it. It's far easier to catch a child being good and reinforce the good behavior and increase the amount of good behavior than it is to reduce the amount of bad. It's a lot more pleasant, too. So that's what we're about. So, again, if we learn some of these basic notions of behavioral psychology, we can start to raise an independent, responsible young person. All right, so let's suppose then maybe they do some things that, all right, we're not thrilled about. For 40 years, I prescribed this little experiment to parents. Because for over 40 years, one of the most common complaints I used to get from parents is that if they had more than one child, their kid's squabbling was going to drive them to an early grave. Oh my God, they're fighting all the time. So here was the experiment I would prescribe. And I would say to them, all right, the next time your kids start to argue, and you know where this is going, there's going to be yelling and so on, and maybe some pushing and shoving or whatever, here's what you do. You get up, don't say a word, walk yourself into the bedroom, your bedroom, leave the door open, and sit on the edge of the bed and just take a look at your watch. Because within 20 seconds, what do you think's going to happen? Okay. Now, when I say that, more often than not, I get, oh my God, are you kidding? If I did that, there would be blood on the floor. And I say, trust me. And they would come back and do that. And they'd come back the following week, and they'd always go, oh, you were right. So what happened? Well, because I didn't tell them what happened, I just told them what to do. But here's what they'd say. Well, it wasn't even 20 seconds. Within 10, 15 seconds, both kids were in my bedroom. Mom, he did, no, she did, he did. So, and I'll say to the parent, mom or dad, so when you gave them tacit permission to slaughter each other, what did they do? Did they take that opportunity and kill each other? No, what did they do? They brought the fight to you. Why? Here we go again. My wrist is getting sore. Because they learn this is a very effective way of getting parents' attention. Because they can see that look of consternation on their face. Like, what the hell am I going to do now? And they like that control. And then usually parents say something really stupid like, okay, who started it this time? Yeah, that's like... And what they learn, and of course what the kids learn is that, gee, if you continue to do this, of course, is that, wow, this game doesn't work anymore. Remember again, I said, what happens when a neutral response follows a behavior? It decreases, drops out. I refer to it as healthy ignoring. I used to do that a lot with my kids. Healthy ignoring. They knew when I was not happy because I'd look away or I'd walk away. Or sometimes I would time myself out. I put myself in my room. Put my headphones on, relax in my bed. That was fine. And you know where the kids were most of the time? Guess. At the door. Dad, come on, come on, come on. It bothered them that I left them. Because you see, they had gotten accustomed to interacting with me in a positive kind of way. And when I didn't like that behavior, I didn't throw a tantrum. I didn't let them see that they could manipulate me. I simply let them see that, oh, Dad, where'd he go? Where? Oh, I guess what I was doing here, I guess he didn't like. I don't know. You see? when my wife would, make a meal, well, I shouldn't say this, early on in our marriage, my wife, she's a fabulous cook now, but early on, we used to say a prayer after the meal. But anyhow, when my wife would try something new, make a new dish, many times, no, not many times, because the kids learn, typically Chad, the younger one, would say, fish! I'm not going to eat fish! Later on, ironically, he became even a vegan and so on. Didn't even eat then. Now, again, what do most parents do when a kid at the table says, I'm not going to eat that? What's the speech we all give? It's like that doll with the pull a ring. Pull a ring. I'm not going to eat that. Okay. How do you know you're not going to like it unless you taste it? How many of your parents said that to you? Raise your hand. Yeah, everybody. Yeah, right. Well, not in my house. I simply said, that's fine, you can leave. I'll have your piece. And while he was still in earshot, I might also add, and any of us who finish our meals tonight, we'll go to Baskin Robbins for dessert. See, that's how life works. What most parents will do, of course, is give them the speech so the kid knows, I knew they were going to say that. And sometimes, if they continue to complain, what do you think their parent then does? Go and make them what? Come on, we know. Chicken McNuggets, macaroni and cheese, or pizza. Okay? And I get parents, my kid is such a picky eater. Really? It's funny, all kids are born drinking milk. How do they become picky eaters? How do you think? Well, I've got a good guess. And my guess is it's by learning to say, I don't want that, not even having to taste it, and getting rewarded for saying that by getting whatever it is you think you like. And you do that long enough, and guess what? You got yourself a picky eater. My kids learned very early, don't want to eat it? Fine. You'll have a better breakfast. Okay. So, not paying attention to certain mildly, even moderately inappropriate behaviors is an excellent way to show your kids that, okay, you're going to really make an effort to catch them when they're good. Remember, that's important. The reinforcement can't stop that. Always got to do that. Catch them when they're good, but healthy ignoring when they're not. And that combination, you see, gets to be very powerful. Because then what they start to learn is, yeah, that's when I get my attention. That's what pays off. So let's talk a little bit about specifically teaching some responsible behavior. First off, we have to start young. As early as we can, we want to start having our kids take part in chores. At the level, of course, that they're capable. Obviously, you're not going to have a 3-year-old do his ironing, okay? I don't think so. But can a 3-year-old maybe take some dishes from the table to the sink? Yes. Can they do certain things like that? Absolutely. And we can praise them for that and reinforce them for that and so on. So we want to start early. Again, we want to be very specific about what we want. In my first book, Who's Raising Whom, I gave an example of the 13 procedures of correctly brushing your teeth. Because early on, when Josh was about 3 or 4, I realized we needed a manual here. Because I'd said, Josh, you need to brush your teeth appropriately. He said, Dad, I am. I said, wait a minute. Yes. Are you putting toothpaste on your teeth? Yes, you are. But the cap is here, the toothbrush is here, the toothpaste is here, the water is dripping, there's yuck in the sink, the medicine cabinet's ajar, the light is on and the fan's on. That's not what I call effectively brushing your teeth. So we made a list. And then, oh, I see, okay. I see, that's what brushing my teeth is, yeah. So we have to be very clear about what we want. Now, are kids going to make mistakes? Sure they are. But that's okay. You help them. A 5-year-old is not going to make a perfect bed with crisp corners. But they can get the sheet and the quilt on it, and maybe you can help them do that and so forth. When both my sons went off to college, both of them called me and said, oh, Dad, my roommates are so lame. They don't know how to wash their clothes. The first week my son was at Tucson, one of his roommates put a Arizona red t-shirt in with all his whites. He wore pink for the 4 years he was there. He said, they don't know how to wash their clothes, dry their clothes. They over dry it. Everything shrunk up. Iron, forget about it. Nobody knows how to iron, and so on. And here's the funny thing. The first time they went shopping with his roommates, Josh told me, one of his roommates comes toward the cart holding 3 loaves of Wonder Bread and a handful of packaged salami. And he said, what are you going to do with that? He says, well, that's my lunch and dinner. And Josh said, what? You're eating salami sandwiches for lunch and dinner? Well, yeah, it's all I know how to make. He said, what are you going to have? He says, well, I'm going to have pork chops and roast chicken and roast beef and steak. Who's going to make that? Me. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Most teenagers today forget about it. Can they iron a pair of pants? I doubt it. Not too many, at least as far as I can tell. When my kids got their license when they were 16, they had to pass Dad's driver's test. Here's Dad's driver's test. And they got their license if they passed it on their 16th birthday. But you had to pass my test. First, you need to change a tire. Then they only drove stick cars. Then I found the steepest hill I could find, put out 2 cones, and then they had to parallel park between those 2 cones without knocking any one of them down. If they could change a tire and park that way, we went to the driver's bureau and they could take the test. Until then, no. Again, I'm trying to prepare them for life. Are they going to ever need to change their spare tire, you think? Absolutely. Girls, too. Might they ever find themselves on an incline with their car and need to be in good control of it with their stick shift? Absolutely. So they needed to learn to do that. The same kind of procedures follow. You clearly state what you're looking for, you offer a reward, and then you let it happen. Allow the natural consequences of their acts. When Josh was 17, I get home and my wife says, "Come here, look at this." And she shows me a photo radar ticket. And there's Josh's face. Speeding on Scottsdale Road. And she says, "Oh, we're going to fry his butt. He's not going to have a car." And I went, "Well, let's talk. And after a little chat, what we came to when he came home, when we strategized, which, by the way, is what parents ought to do, especially with teens, is to strategize, talk with each other, be unified. So basically, when he came home, we said, "Josh, here, take a look at this." And he said, "Oh, I figured you're going to get that sooner or later." Okay. And so I said, "Yeah, your mom and I have talked. Here's the class that you need to go to, and here it costs $85. Do you have $85? "Well, Dad, you know I don't have $85. I said, "Well, yeah, I know you don't. And I'm not about to give you $85 for your imprudent speed. So here's what your mom and I have decided. Mom needs the windows of the house squeegeed and cleaned, which you're going to do, and I need my car detailed. So you're going to take this Saturday, and you're going to squeegee the windows and detail my car. And then the following Saturday, you're going to go to that class, because we're going to pay you the $85 for that. Or you can choose not to do that, let the tickets stay. The insurance rates will go up 10%, which you will have to pay, which of course you have no money, so therefore you won't be able to drive. You decide. Now, Josh wasn't happy, of course. But who was he angry at? Himself. And that is exactly where it's supposed to be. Because if we said, all right, no driving for a month, here's $85 and take that damn class. Who's he angry at now? Us. Me. That's how we mess up. We need to allow the teen the logical consequence of his or her behavior. That's what needs to happen. I used to say all the time to the kids, when you finish your reports, take it out of the printer. Be sure you finish the job. Sure, Dad, sure, Dad. And of course, the morning comes, they're rushing around, it's late and so forth, and there it is, and I might say, okay, do you guys have everything? Yeah, sure. And there they go, and there's the report still in the printer. What do? Do I go running after them? Hey, you idiots, I said get the printer out of the paper. Is that what I do? Is that going to teach them? No. About 30 minutes later, the phone rings. Dad, yeah. Yeah, I know. It's in the printer. Oh, why didn't you tell me? I said, do you have everything twice? Yeah. So I'm going to get a lower grade. Yeah, I know. That's what happens when you're not responsible. Oh, Dad. And I hear this all the time. That's what I get for having a father who's a psychologist. That's a good lesson. I'm not going to spoil that lesson. If you're not going to be responsible, you get a lower grade. That's the way life works. Because when you're in the world and you're working for a boss, and you're on a big project, a multi-million-dollar project, and that report is due that Monday, and millions of dollars depend on it, and you come in and go, boss, I'm sorry, I left the report in the printer. What's the boss going to say? No bother. It's only a couple of million, not a problem. You think? No. But the point is, again, is let the teen see the errors of his way or her way. Most teens are angry at their parents for their irresponsibility. That's not what we want. They need to be angry at themselves for their irresponsibility. Many times I saw them heading off a cliff, if you will. I knew where it was going. I might have said, well, have you thought about... And then they go, oh, is that what you were talking about? Yeah, I was. Yeah. Nothing scared my kids more than for me to do their job. Because they always knew something would come. I remember when Josh was about 13, his job was to rush the pool on Saturday by noon. Well, there's one Saturday, he's sitting there, I don't know, just hanging out, watching TV. It's already past 12 already, so he's blown off this job. Now, I could have said, get your butt out there and do the pool. But no, that's not me. So I'm now thinking, all right, he's now chosen to be irresponsible. There needs to be a consequence for that. Now, at 2 o'clock, there was his Little League game. And he loved Little League because he was a star. He was the top batter. He played shortstop. Everyone saw how good he was. He loved Little League. And the coach wanted us there by 1:30. Game at 2. So what did I do? I cleaned the pool. When did I get out there? 1:30, yeah. So at 1:45, he comes out with his cleats on the pool deck, slipping and sliding and saying, Dad, what are you doing? We gotta go. I gotta go to the gym. We gotta go to the game. I'm gonna be late. And I said, well, Josh, you chose not to do your job here today, so now it's left to me. So this is the time I chose to do it, but I'm going to be late. And I said, well, you know, Josh, when you make poor choices, these kinds of things happen. It's called life. So we got there just as the game was starting, about 2:15, and I walked over to the coach and I said, we're late because Josh chose to be irresponsible and I applied a consequence. You're the coach, do whatever you want, but for my money, I think he could sit an inning or two, but that's up to you. So he sat for 2 innings. Who was he mad at? Himself. See, this is what we talk about when we talk about building responsibility, teaching responsibility. Because if I got in his face and said, get out there and clean the pool, that's not teaching him to be responsible. As I say at the bottom of this page, if you have to make your child or teen be responsible, they're not. They're not. There's also another statistic at the bottom of the page, which is well researched. 1/3 of college freshmen across this country every year do not successfully complete their freshman year. Now, that doesn't mean they completely drop out of college and never return. No, that's not true. Fortunately, a good chunk of them do ultimately return and finish college. But 1/3 do not finish successfully their freshman year or the first year. Why, do you think? Yeah. Well, here I'll tell you why more specifically. You know why? Because, and by the way, this is interesting. We're not talking about kids at the bottom of the barrel. These are kids who are good enough to get into college. So we're talking about kids at the top of the barrel. But here's what's going on. Many of these kids were made to do their homework by their parents. And their parents stood over them and monitored them all the way through high school. And they did a damn good job of it too. They got the kid into college. I've had cases where the kid was going to a high-end school on the other side of the country and fell flat on their keister. And their parents, and those parents devoted like $20,000, $30,000 that first semester, to that high-end school and got nothing back. Why? What did that teen learn? I only have to be responsible when I am made to be responsible. And when they went off to college, and I shake my head, and I've said to some parents, what did you think was going to happen? You ride his back for 4 years and assume that just because now he goes off to college, I'm going to be independent and responsible. No, he's not. We live what we learn. I never made my kids get good grades, ever. I never paid my kids for grades either. Did I reinforce them? You bet. I love to travel. My wife and I travel a lot. I used to travel a lot with my kids. We took fishing trips. We took bike trips. We took hiking trips. And that's what we got for those kids who got honor roll or better. And if both kids got honor roll, both kids and I took a trip. Sometimes if one kid did and the other one didn't, I would say, oh, that's good. We have more money for a better trip. Because that's life. That's how life works. So, the kid who didn't get to go, one, his brother got to go and not him, which galls him for sure, and two, they're getting a better trip because he didn't go. What do you think happened the following semester? A lot better, yes. I got a letter from my insurance agent making it specifying what my insurance would be, what I would pay for their insurance if they had a 3.0 or better. It was a 25% discount. It was substantial. And what it would be if it wasn't a 3.0 or better. And I simply gave it to the boys and said, here it is. I'm paying this amount. It's your choice. I'm not saying you have to get better than the 3 point. What I'm saying is, I'm going to pay this amount that I would pay if you did get better than a 3-point. If you choose not to, that's okay, but it looks like you're going to have to come up with about $1,000 every year to drive. Your choice. Because that's life. That's how life works. And not surprisingly, they chose to be responsible because they wanted to drive. You know, folks, we can do this. It's not that hard. The theory of behavioral psychology is truly understandable. It really is. It's, again, as parents, being mindful of the consequences of your child's behavior. I was constantly, as I raised my kids, excuse me, monitoring their behavior, deciding if that behavior was good, bad, or indifferent, and thinking about what would be the appropriate consequence to that behavior so that, again, I could foster an independent, responsible young man. You can do it too. Thank you for your time.